if I feel like this, like I did at the end, I think I could play another one after that. But I'll just leave all that open.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. Today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. Go to dollarshaveclub.com/LOFB and get your first month for just $5. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball and on Instagram at redrock_bball and of course facebook.com/redrockbasketball. I'm back today with another of the season in review podcast. This is the ninth episode in this 30-part series, quite obviously. And we're going to be talking about the Dallas Mavericks in today's season in review show. So,
let's get to it.
All right, let's get to it indeed. We'll start by talking about a Dallas team that was not the most sexy heading into the season from a fantasy point of view, and unsurprisingly, that's sort of the way that it turned out. Didn't end up having a top 50 player at all, didn't even have a top 75 player. But let's talk about the team as a whole. They ended up the season 33-49, right on their expected win-loss ratio for the season. And not great, but it's also one of the worst Dallas seasons that we've seen in the last 20 years, 15 years. So I think that Mavericks fans should feel pretty okay about that. Now, one thing I don't like about the Mavs is they finished with pick 9, and I know that the Mavs were tanking at the end of last season and they would have loved to have fallen to that 8th spot, which that win at the end of the season cost them, and then that pick number 8 actually moved to become pick number 3, which was the Sacramento Kings moving up to pick 3, which was then obviously pick swapped with Philadelphia. So the Mavs could have found themselves at pick 3, and pick 9, I really think that the Mavs really need to get a point guard. And I think they're all going to be gone by pick 9. I think that group of 5, Fultz, Ball, Smith, Fox, and Ntilikina will all be gone by pick 9. Whether they can attract someone in free agency remains to be seen. But I would have loved for them to get their hands on a guy like a Fox or a Smith or even a Ntilikina at that point, and they might not be able to at pick 9, depending on. I think that the top 8 prospects are relatively clear. They might be looking at a guy like Lauri Markkanen. We hear all the talk about he's the next Dirk. No one's the next Dirk. Dirk is Dirk. Maybe Markkanen can be that guy to play as a stretch 5 for this team alongside the Pencil, Harrison Barnes at the 4, and maybe Markkanen could be that player. Or play alongside Nerlens Noel there as their center as well. But yeah, they've got some issues in their backcourt. Maybe they look at a guy like, they go hard on a player like a Donovan Mitchell. Maybe they take a Zach Collins. It is not a great spot, I don't think, pick 9 for the Mavericks, but hey, anything could happen. Players could fall to them and they could find themselves with a bargain, much like the Denver Nuggets have in the last couple of seasons with Manny Mudiay and the Blue Arrow both falling outside of their expected spot so that Denver could snap them up. And that might happen to Dallas. Maybe they do get Smith falling, which would be an ideal situation, I believe, for them to have him at pick 9. That is their only pick 9. They don't have a second round selection for this upcoming draft, having traded that away. In terms of free agency, the big one for them is Nerlens Noel, who they traded for from the Philadelphia 76ers, giving up a pair of second-round draft picks and Justin Anderson, so not a huge amount. He is a restricted free agent, and what they want to pay Nerlens Noel is up for debate. I think they will pay him a decent chunk of money. Nerlens didn't play a huge amount down the stretch. That they limited him, but I don't think that there was anything nefarious in any of that. A lot of that was part of that tanking thing that Mark Cuban was talking about, and I think that they will pony up a sizable amount of cash on Noel, assuming his medical stuff checked out when he arrived in Dallas. He's obviously had those knee problems throughout his career. Will Noel command $20 million a year? I don't think that's an outrageous statement. We saw what Mahinmi and Biyombo and Mozgov got last season, and they are clearly inferior players to what Nerlens Noel is. So for him to get 18 to 20 million, I think that's sort of what we'll be looking at. The team has a team option on Dirk Nowitzki at $25 million. Obviously, they want Dirk to stay, but it's all going to be a negotiation thing of, do they decline that? Does Dirk sign on for another 2 years? Does he sign at a cheaper price to facilitate adding someone in? So that the team and Dirk will discuss that. There's nothing to be concerned about with Nowitzki not coming back, though. They also hold a team option on DeAndre Liggins at $1.6 million. He came across right at the very end of the season. There's nothing too exciting there. Then they've got a bunch of non-guaranteed deals. Devin Harris at $4.4 million. I would expect, and I would almost guarantee that they bring him back and guarantee that contract. He was solid for them in his minimal role. Salah Mejri at $1.5 million non-guaranteed. No doubt that he'll be back. Same with Dorian Finney-Smith and Yogi Ferrell, both at $1.3 million non-guaranteed. They've also got Nicholas Brasino and Jared Utoff with $1.3 million non-guaranteed deals. I'm less certain about those players. Brasino I thought looked good, and I would think that he would come back at that cheap price. Utoff, he only came on at the end of the season to the team and wasn't overly spectacular. So if they're looking to clear a little bit of space, then he's an easy decision. But guys like Brasino, Finney-Smith and Ferrell, all at that $1.3 million, and Mejri at $1.5, they seem like absolute no-brainers to be retained and have those contracts guaranteed for four players who, obviously with Finney-Smith especially and Ferrell as guys who are rotation players, to get them at under $1.5 million. There's not even a decision to be made there with those guys. This team was the 29th highest in pace last season, so that's obviously not ideal from a fantasy point of view, and that translated to the numbers that came through from the Mavericks, and they had the 25th best offense, which is also not ideal, 25th in offensive rating. One thing that was positive is they had the 5th highest three-point attempt rate, with guys like Harrison Barnes, Darren Williams when he was there, Dirk, Wes Matthews obviously taking a lot of threes. Only the 29th highest free throw attempt rate. And I think that makes sense. You know that Wes Matthews is not a free throw drawer. And I've just realized that Wes Matthews is one of those names. There are certain names in sport where announcers or dickhead podcasters like me say them and they have to say the full name because it just sounds wrong to say one name. I think that Wes Matthews is one of those guys. If you just call him Matthews, it just doesn't sound right. I could call him Wes, I could call him Wes Matthews, but if I say Matthews, it just does not sound right at all. Weird. Who are other guys like that? I know there's plenty of them. I'm blanking on who those other players are, that if you just call them by their surname, it doesn't sound right. You have to call them by a full name. Matthews is definitely one. That's really thrown me off now. I've got his name all weird in my head. He's not a noted free throw drawer. Harrison Barnes isn't either. Dirk obviously is not at this point in his career, really getting to the line multiple times. So that's why their free throw rate was so high. They had the 3rd best turnover percentage, so took care of the ball as well, and also created turnovers at the highest rate defensively. So that was something that did enable this team to stay competitive while having such a poor offense. They hit the 5th most 3-pointers in the NBA, but only the 30th in scoring, and a lot of that is to do with the fact that they had the 29th ranked pace. So yes, they're hitting a lot of threes, but their overall points weren't high because they weren't having as many possessions, and they weren't hitting some of their twos as well. Let's have a look at their offensive ratings. Salah Mejri led the team with the highest offensive rating. Next was Dwight Powell. Next was Nerlens Noel. And then Seth Curry. So the big men dominating there. Best defensive rating, it's the big men as well. Noel, Mejri, Bogut, who obviously is no longer on the team. Powell and rookie AJ Hammonds formed that top 4 in terms of best defensive ratings on the team. They had just 4 rotation guys shoot over 40% on corner threes, and that was Dirk, Curry, Wes Matthews, and Darren Williams. Some interesting conversion numbers at the rim. Harrison Barnes, the pencil, 68% at the rim. Seth Curry, 64%, which is fantastic for Curry to be able to finish at that rate. And Dwight Powell, 76% at the rim is a huge number. And his name appears quite a bit in some of these advanced numbers. Despite him having some struggles during the season, he was a relatively valuable player. Wes Matthews was only assisted on 30% of his twos, which I thought was really low for a guy that is not... He doesn't have that athleticism, especially post-Achilles, to be taking guys off the dribble and that sort of stuff, but only 30% of his twos were assisted, 84% of his threes were, and obviously the majority of his shots did come from threes, so it's not that surprising that was the case. And Barea, interestingly, JJ Barea under 40% assisted on threes. He's taking a lot of pull-up threes as well, which is not always the greatest shot, but Barea is a pretty good three-point shooter. Dirk Nowitzki had 77% of his two-point attempts assisted, which I thought was remarkably high for a guy like Dirk that you can give the ball to and let him, work some stuff, take some guys, not necessarily off the dribble, but do some moves in the post, that sort of stuff. That the fact that so many of his attempts were assisted was a little bit noticeable to me. Well, it was definitely noticeable because I noticed it. It was a little bit surprising to me. Let's look at the advanced numbers. PER leader, Nerlens Noel, even though he only played for that second half of the year, he had a 19.9 PER. The true shooting was Mejri at 65%, and Barea led the team in usage at 26.2. Win shares was a tie between the pencil, Seth Curry, and Dwight Powell. Yes, Dwight Powell at 4.6, and win shares per 48 was Nerlens Noel at 0.179. Offensive box score plus minus, again, it's JJ Barea poking his head up at 2, and defensive box score plus minus, well, Bogut led the team in that clearly, but he wasn't on it at the end, and Nerlens Noel was the next highest player, and he had the highest overall box score plus minus as well, while Seth Curry had the highest VORP on the team. So some interesting things there. The acquisition of Noel looks like he was fitting in nicely. The addition of Seth Curry and Harrison Barnes were also quite positive for this Dallas team. They were a team that only had 3 lineups go over 100 minutes for the season, and their most used lineup was Barnes, Curry, Yogi Ferrell, Wes Matthews, and Dirk, and that played 256 minutes, and they were a positive 1.1 points. That was the only one of their lineups over 100 minutes that was a positive, so that's I guess that gives good notice of the value that Yogi Ferrell was able to provide. We'll talk about him at length a little bit later on. Their best 5-man unit out of the top 20 minutes played was Dorian Finney-Smith, Devin Harris, Dirk Nowitzki. This is 4-man line. Oh, sorry, 5-man. Let me get myself sorted. Barea, Finney-Smith, Devin Harris. So that Barea and Harris backcourt with Finney-Smith at the 3, Dirk at the 4, and Dwight Powell at the 5, or vice versa. That was a plus 21.6 in 65 minutes. Their most used 4-man, no confusion here, Curry, Matthews, Barnes, and Dirk, and that was a negative 0.6 in almost 500 minutes. So, basically spot on. While the best 4-man was Barnes, Bogut, DFS, and Matthews, and that was a plus 7.3. Obviously, we can't recreate that with Bogut not around, but Finney-Smith, a guy that provided a ton of value, was an undrafted rookie for this team. The most used 3-man, Barnes, Curry, and Matthews, and that was a marginal positive of 0.1, while the best 3-man was Barnes, Curry, and Darren Williams at 3.7, and the most used 2-man, I don't think that anyone would be too shocked to see that it was Barnes and Matthews, and that was a negative 3.5, while the best 2-man was Barnes and Salah Mejri. Again, Mejri was quite a valuable contributor to this team, 1.8 points positive for them. We talk about stashed players for the Dallas Mavericks. There's only one guy, and if I spend any time on this guy, it's too long. Satnam Singh, who was a second rounder in 2015. He's a 7'2" center from India. He played 8 games in the D-League. 5 minutes a game and averaged 1.6 points, 1.3 rebounds. He had 0 blocks in his 40-plus minutes in the D-League. 0 blocks and 1 steal. He had a negative VORP, a negative win shares. He is bad. He will never be an NBA player, and he will never be a contributor. So I don't see that. I don't see that being any need for you to look at Satnam Singh as any sort of stash value play. Now, it's as good a time as any for me to tell you about today's sponsor, and that is Dollar Shave Club. Dollar Shave Club is the smarter choice. It gets you a great shave at a great price, conveniently delivered right to your door. Not only do you not have to go and find your way around the pharmacy, or as you guys in America will call it, the drugstore or the supermarket, and pay exorbitant prices and get someone to go and get your razor from underneath the counter because someone's going to steal it because there's a black market in razor trade going on at the local train station. And I say that not as a joke, because that is exactly what happens down here. People flog them and then go in, and you can go to the train station and they go, you want some razors? Want some razors? I go, mate, if I wanted do I look like I want a razor? Have you seen his beard? And secondly, if I want a razor, I'm not going to buy it off some bloke with a scabby face standing at the train station selling them out of his jacket pocket on a day that's 105 degrees, where you probably don't need to wear that jacket. So I'll pass on that. And that's a complete diversion. That's the opposite of what Dollar Shave Club is. They're not the bloke at the train station. They're the company that's selling you great razors at a great price. It's an awesome life hack and a no-brainer choice. You can either go and buy that cheap disposable razor that gives you a cheap shave. Who wants to do that? Cut your face, rashes, yuck. No one wants to deal with that. You can get great quality at a great price. And you can see my beard. I don't shave my whole face, but I do have to shave parts under my neck, neckline, cheek line, all that stuff. And having a precise and great razor is awesome. I use my Dollar Shave Club Executive Razor with that Dr. Carver's shave butter, and the blade glides gently across my face, giving me that smoothness and definition that I so desire with my current choice of facial hair. The shave butter is transparent, so it gives you a precise shave, so you can see exactly what you're doing. You want to shave your facial hair into a pencil mustache? Go ahead. The Dr. Carver's shave butter will allow you to do that. And you too can make that smarter choice by joining Dollar Shave Club. For a limited time, the new members get their first month of the Executive Razor with a tube of Dr. Carver's shave butter for only $5 with free shipping. And after that, the razors are just a few bucks a month. In your first month box, you get an awesome weighty handle and a full cartridge of 4 cassettes, and a tube of their shave butter. After your first month, replacement cartridges ship automatically at their regular price. There are no hidden fees. There are no commitments, and you can cancel at any time. Join today at dollarshaveclub.com/LOFB for that executive razor pack for just $5. That's dollarshaveclub.com/LOFB. I see I had a question come in while I was doing that from Bobby Madry. He says, I see no reason Noel should re-sign. They limited his minutes so he couldn't command more dollars. I think that is absolutely false, and I don't think that is anything to do with it. And should he re-sign? He doesn't have a choice. If someone offers him a contract, Dallas just matches it. It's not about him re-signing. He could go the route of not accepting any restricted free agent offers at all, and from any other team, and just play under the restricted tender. But given his knee history, he will want to lock in a 3 or 4 year deal and get $60-80 million, whatever it is. He doesn't have that option. I would be absolutely stunned if Noel is pissed with the organization, if he comes in and they haven't discussed with him what they were doing in terms of limiting his minutes at the end of the year. I don't think there's any acrimony between the two parties. And as I've said plenty of times, the fact that his minutes were limited, I don't think has any impact on his actual market value. I don't think there's any concern with that whatsoever. And at this point, I would be stunned if Noel is not in Dallas next season. Even if he signs a tender with another team, he's coming back, and I think they match him. I don't think there's too much doubt in that. And yes, Bobby, he is restricted. So yeah, he's not going anywhere. Not that I think. Anyway, let's get into these guys and talk about this team. The fantasy leader on this team was the pencil, Harrison Barnes, who came in as the 82nd ranked player. And it just shows you how poor this team was in terms of overall fantasy value. And this is something that when we were doing the Red Rock 30 team leagues at the start of the season, especially those ones where we were choosing a team, the team that went last, and as a quick breakdown what it was with 30 teams, and you had an opportunity to choose an NBA team. And with that NBA team that you chose, you got one player from that team. And the 30th choice was always Dallas. In both those leagues, Dallas was the 30th choice. And the reason why is this. Now, Barnes, there was a lot of doubts about Harrison Barnes coming across and being the man, being the number one or 1B option in Dallas, given the way that he played in the finals. And people thought that the last 3 games of the NBA finals defined the entirety of Harrison Barnes' career and what his career will be moving forward. And that was never going to be the case. Barnes had a shaky preseason and people were very much out on him. I wasn't. I was pretty happy to grab him at the spot that he was going. And I'm going back to look at the comments on Harrison Barnes over on Basketball Monster, and people talking about how he was struggling. And this is my comment in preseason. I said, I'll say this. There is no way he shoots 26% during the season. He has looked terrible, but he can only be better. This is the absolute worst time to sell him. And that that turned out being the exact case, and you could have got him outside the top 100 if you were drafting in the preseason and returned 20, 30 spots maybe on that draft spot for what Barnes did. He averaged 19 points a game in 36 minutes. He hit some key game-winning buckets. He hit a 3-a-game, had 5 boards, 1.5 assists, 0.8 steals, and 0.2 blocks. But those last 3 numbers that I read out is part of the reason why his fantasy appeal is limited. No assists, no steals, no blocks. He was 47% from the field, 86% from the line, and 35% from 3. He also shot 37% from 3 post All-Star break, and I think people get a little bit surprised at his 3-point shooting, and they look at it, and I know there was a question that came in from Jordan saying, is his post All-Star 3-point shooting real, or is it a mirage? Well, in his 3 seasons in Golden State, he shot 35, 41, and 38% from 3. So the fact that he was at 35% over the course of the season, and over his last 23 games, he shot 40%. I don't think that should be considered a massive anomaly. Yes, the increased usage had an impact on him, and it dropped his true shooting down from 56 down to 54 for the year. But expecting 38% from 3 from Harrison Barnes, I don't think that's a bad expectation to have, given the sort of player he is. He took his per 36 scoring up from 13.6 to 19.5, so 6 points per 36 minutes is huge. The rebounding, the assists, they dropped. The 3-pointers dropped as well, and his steals and blocks stayed about the same. But overall, his efficiency, field goal percentage stayed the same, and he's took his free throws up by 10%. So you got a big bump in scoring from the pencil, and you got a big bump in his free throws. He got to the line more, and he converted them at a higher rate. But his restrictions, he's not a big rebounder, assist guy, steals guy, blocks guy, or a high volume 3-point shooter. And that's always going to limit his fantasy value to being a guy that's maybe a 20-point scorer, but what else does he do? Provide average and above average efficiency, and below average numbers in those other areas. So I think that we can expect a pretty similar season again from Harrison Barnes next year. I don't see a huge amount changing. The Mavericks were only 0.7 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, but that's a positive, obviously. But I don't think that it's a big detriment to say that he wasn't leading the team in that category. He was fine. He was a huge part of what they did. His 3-point percentage jumped after the All-Star break, but his ranking actually dipped, and he was the 135th ranked player post All-Star. And he's one of those guys where his head-to-head value to me is behind his rotisserie value, maybe a round or round and a half less valuable in head-to-head, although that scoring can be quite good. But the fact that he's just a sort of average, below average contributor in all those other categories doesn't give him the nod in head-to-head, but he's still going to be that solid guy. If you're picking in, say, a 14-team league, a really solid mid-rounder, and in a 12-team league, you know what you're going to get from a guy like Barnes. Let's talk about Nerlens Noel. He played 23 games in his time in Dallas, averaged 22 minutes a game, 8.9 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, 1.1 steals, 1.1 blocks, 58 and 72 as his 2 percentages. And he was quite impressive during the limited time he played. He was the 77th ranked player post All-Star, 74th pre. So about that zone, and he has got legitimate top 30 upside if he plays 30 minutes a night. Now, the problem for him playing 30 minutes a night is, what do they do with Dirk Nowitzki? The best position for Harrison Barnes is at the 4. And while Dirk is around, obviously he is going to be playing the 4 as well. So will they play next year? And I think they should. Will they play Barnes, Nowitzki, and Noel together for big chunks of minutes? I think that's what they should do. Now, whether they will do it or not remains to be seen. But Noel has got significant upside, and a lot of his upside comes from that steal rate as a center is huge, and his ability to block shots. Now, he wasn't quite at the same level he's been this year, on a total value, but his per 36 numbers in his rookie year, 2.1 steals, 2.2 blocks. In his second year, 2.2 steals, 1.8 blocks. This year, 2.2 steals, 1.8 blocks. So exactly the same. The difference is that he played only 21 minutes a game this year, as opposed to 29 and 31 in his first 2 seasons. So he is that guy who can legitimately be an over 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks player who averages 12 and 7 in 30 minutes. And that has top 35 value. with his ability, and we've seen his improved free throws this year, 69% for the season.
Giggity.
And much higher than that once he landed in Dallas, plus had his highest field goal percentage for his career, 46 to 52 to 59. That's a definite trend. It's not going to continue rising, but this was by far his best season in efficiency point of view. Took his true shooting from 54 to 62. That's a big leap for Nerlens. He just needs those 30 minutes, and he is a comfortable top 50 guy. And I feel pretty good about him being that player next season. Maybe he's only 28 or 29 minutes, but that's still a top 50 guy for Nerlens Noel next season. Seth Curry was a guy, obviously, that I hated the fact that the Kings let him go. I hated the fact that the Bulls didn't go after him, and he landed on a very cheap contract in Dallas. I was a little bit concerned at the start of the year as to where Seth was going to fit in with this team. There was obviously Darren Williams around. There was JJ Barea, and we know how much Rick Carlisle loves Barea. There was Wes Matthews. What do they do with Barnes, and how does he fit in? And Curry started off the season slowly. I think that's fair to say. But with injuries, the buyout of Darren Williams, with Barea missing so much time, Curry found himself into a role where he played 29 minutes a game. He averaged 13 points, 2 triples, 2.5 boards, 2.5 assists, over a steal on 48 and 85, shooting 43% from 3, which are obviously absolutely superb numbers from Seth Curry. After the All-Star break, his numbers actually went up. He played 31 minutes a game and averaged 16, 2.5 and 2.5, which included 2.5 threes and a steal, and shot 52, 92, 45. They are bananas efficiency numbers, and he was the 50th ranked player post All-Star break. Now, Darren Williams isn't coming back. Do they run Seth Curry as the starting point guard next season? They started to do that at the end of the year when they realized that Yogi Ferrell's probably not going to be a good starting point guard, and they're also in this position where I don't think they're going to be able to get themselves a point guard in the draft. So do they run Seth, Wes, Pencil, Dirk, Noel as their starting 5? At this point, I would say yes. Now, lots can change. Do they bring Jeff Teague?
My name is Jeff.
Just an excuse for me to hit that button. Do they bring Drew Holiday? Do they bring George Hill across? Do they find Dennis Smith? I don't know, but I think that Curry is going to play 30 minutes, 29 minutes at least per game for next season, and that's going to make him a pretty comfortable top 100 player. The efficiency is really where his value comes from. A point guard shooting 52%, 51% from the field is bananas, doesn't miss free throws. They're his two biggest categorical positives outside of the threes for the season, and in that second half of the year, they're actually higher than that. They're really big contributions in those percentage numbers for Seth. The team was 3.9 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court. Same with Noel as well. They both had that 3.9 number. And you feel relatively confident in the next couple of seasons of Seth Curry. Maybe not moving forward after that, but he was really impressive for this team. And I think he's going to have some decent fantasy value. Now, from a fantasy point of view, his value is limited by the categories that he provides in. Efficiency, yes. Field goal percentage and free throw percentage, really good. Scoring, decent. 3-pointers, good. But rebounding, yuck. Assists, yuck. Steals, he gets 1 a game, which is all right. It's an average number, but you don't get any rebounds or assists, and of course you get absolutely no blocks from Seth. He blocked a total of 6 shots for the entire season. It's not why you draft him, but he's not adding any extra value in that area. It's going to be points, it's going to be efficiency, it's going to be threes where his value comes, and that limits him from being a top 50 guy. I think even though he was 50th post All-Star, I think it limits him being a top 50 guy, but it firmly puts him in that 70 to 90 range, I believe, heading into next season, and I think you'll be able to replicate those numbers for at least another 1 to 2 seasons, and then I think you'll see some sort of drop-off occur with Seth Curry, which is one of the things you do always need to guard against in dynasty leagues. Dirk, wasn't the greatest season from Dirk. He looked fine, though, at the end of the year. Played 54 games, 26 minutes a game, averaged 14 points with 6.5 boards, 1.5 threes, and in true Dirk style, not much defensively, zero point 0.6 steals and 0.6 blocks, with 44% shooting, 88% from the field, and 38% from three-point range for Dirk. In the second half of the year, when he got healthier, 27 minutes, 15-7 with 1.5 threes and shot 46%. We know he had that Achilles problem bother him for the entirety of that start of the year. But what I take from this is seeing from Dirk in that second half when he was healthy, the points, the efficiency, everything started to go up to be more in line with what we expect from Dirk Nowitzki. And he was running fine at the end of the year, and you would expect a similar sort of thing from him next season. I wouldn't be expecting him to push over 30 minutes a night. That's just not who he's going to be at this point. But 27, 28 minutes a night, I don't think is an unrealistic expectation from Dirk. And that puts him around that 100 mark. If you're going any higher than 100 for Dirk, I think you're reaching, because the upside is absolutely not there with him. But consistency in scoring, high free throw percentage, and some threes, he has value. I just don't know how high that value is going to be from a fantasy point of view. The team was 1.7 points per 100 possessions better off with Dirk this season. He's just that guy, like so many of these players, that hovers around that top 100. They had no players inside the top 75, but they had 5 inside the top 110 for this season, with Barnes, Noel, Curry, Dirk, and Wes Matthews all fitting inside that top 110 and ranked, in fact, between 82 and 108. You found 5 of their players sit, and I think that the only one of those with a real scope to improve from that next season is going to be Noel, who could easily and should become a top 50 guy, whereas these other players stay in that 80 to 110 range. Barnes, Curry, Dirk, and of course Wes Matthews, who we'll talk about in a sec. And by talking about in a sec, I mean let's do it now. He was the 108th ranked player, whereas he played 34 minutes a game in his 73 minutes. So he's getting through a lot of minutes, 2 years removed from that Achilles injury. Averaged 13.5 points and hit 2.4 threes, but did it really inefficiently. Just 39% from the field and 36% from three for a true shooting of 53%. He offered 3.6 rebounds and 2.9 assists, which was really surprising to me, the assist numbers from Wes this season. He went from 1.9 last year to 2.9 this year. And in fact, over the last 20 games of the year, he was averaging 4 assists a game and stuff that I just didn't expect to see out of him. And maybe because he's playing with Seth Curry, who's not as ball dominant as, say, a guy like Darren Williams, or not the guy that's initiating as much as, say, Darren Williams, that Wes picked that part up in his game. And that might be something that we can look for him to go from being a 2.9 assists guy to being a 3.5 assist guy. And while it might not seem like big, it's a 15% increase. And that turns him from being a guy that's 106th to maybe a guy that's 86th. Maybe that's the difference it is. The problem is his efficiency was just horrendous. He's not a big steals guy. He doesn't get rebounds. And he saw his three-point shot really dip over those last 20 games. When those assists drop, he shot under 30% from three, which I imagine will come back up. I don't think that's something that's going to necessarily stick. He also averaged just 8.7 points in that area. But he's not a high upside guy. He's not a guy that I look at and go, yeah, Wes is the guy that I'm grabbing at the end here that's really going to work for me. To me, he's someone that I go, hey, he's on the waiver wire. I need some threes. Can I add him for a short amount of time? Yes, but I do have to realize that he is going to be up and down. He is going to be inconsistent. He's going to give me jack shit in most of the other categories, with the exception of maybe that increase in assists. And he's going to give me high free throws on minimal attempts. The team was actually 1.4 points better off with him on the bench last season, and given his recovery from the Achilles, which again we're almost 2 years away from, I don't see him returning to anywhere near that Portland level, and that's pretty much a commonplace thing with players who do have Achilles problems, as I talk about on this show, probably way too much, that it is so hard to come back from those sort of injuries. Post All-Star, Wes' ranking really dipped, 82nd pre, 173rd post, as that shooting dropped down, as his usage dropped down as well, and he wasn't providing us with a huge amount during that time frame. And is not a player that I would be looking at as a strong late round pick for next year. And how old is Wes Matthews? I probably should look that up. I'll get to that in a sec. I think he's about 30 as it is already, and you don't expect a player at that age to really start to improve and provide huge leaps forward in what he can. Yeah, he is 30. Huge leaps forward in what he's going to be able to do. So I think Wes is going to be in that 100 to 130 range, with maybe the potential to jump up if the assists rise. But his end of the season, when Seth started to become more prominent, when Yogi became more prominent, his role, I guess, on the offense definitely changed, and his usage dropped, and his shot attempts dropped, and that did negatively affect his fantasy rank. If he can increase his usage back with that increased assist, then he's okay. But I'm not feeling great about Wes Matthews as we move forward. Kevin Farrell, Yogi, one of those players that gets a lot of hype, and rightfully so. He had some pretty impressive performances during the season, including that 9 3-pointer game that he had against Portland. But overall, I don't think that you'd say that he was a lock to become a star. Post All-Star, he had some nice numbers. He was the 142nd ranked player in that time frame, averaging 27 minutes a game, 10 points, 2.5 rebounds, 1.5 threes, 4 assists and a steal, but shot just 39% from the field and 37% from three. The Mavericks like him. They signed him to that 2-year deal, of which the second year is non-guaranteed. They will assuredly pick that up, but he is not a starting point guard, in my opinion. I think the 27 minutes he saw post All-Star will probably be higher than what he sees next season. They will look to bring in a point guard. They said that they will. Now, whether that is one of those free agents, whether that is someone that's in the draft, or whether they just continue to play Seth Curry at that position, or they run with JJ Barea there as well. I don't see Farrell as being a standard league player for next season. He couldn't really maintain standard league value for the majority of this season, despite being that starter for a big stretch. And then he lost that job to Curry down the stretch, and they ran Seth as that starting point guard to try out a few things. There's a chance that Farrell is the starter next season. I think it's a very, very, very small chance, and I wouldn't be banking on that. He was basically dead even in terms of his on-off numbers. He had his moments, but like so many of these unknown players that come in and have these big games, teams don't know about him and teams don't respect him, and that's what happened in that Portland game. They just didn't close out on him. They just let him shoot, and he hit them. And then after that, teams went, you know what, let's get into this guy a little bit, and that led to some problems with Farrell, and he couldn't hit them at that rate. He couldn't get the shots off. He couldn't finish. He couldn't do what he needed to do. I thought his creation stuff was pretty good. His playmaking was solid. But realistically, he is JJ Barea, and he's going to fit that JJ Barea role at some point in the future, whether that's behind Seth Curry or it's someone else. And I don't think that Seth is their point guard of the future, but I'm also pretty sure that Yogi Ferrell is not that point guard of the future for this. I'm 99% certain that Ferrell is not that guy. Could be proven wrong. I just don't see it with him. As for JJ Barea, he was the 173rd ranked player this year. He dealt with what looked like a severe Achilles problem earlier on, turned out to be a bad calf problem. Only saw 35 games, 22 minutes, 11 points, 1.5 threes, 2.5 boards, 5.5 assists, and half a steal on 41 and 86, and shot 36% from three. And he was always that player and has been for the last 2 years. When Barea is getting minutes, he is a fantasy useful player. Get him 28 minutes and you will get use out of JJ Barea. The problem is that with his calf injury that he just couldn't play, and that limited him. The team was 4.1 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court. Rick Carlisle loves him. He can rely upon him. He is going to play another 20 minutes a game next season at least, and he's going to be a solid 18, 16 team league guy, maybe even a deeper 12, a league that goes 170 deep, that sort of a league, because of his ability to dish the assists and hit some threes. Now that combination which Barea provides, 1.5 threes, 5.5 assists, is super, super valuable. And getting those assists is not easy to do. Even in a 12-team league, you're desperate for assists. 20 minutes, 5 assists for Barea, which is basically what he did this year, that can be super valuable. And he's also not a big drain in other areas. He can give you decent points, solid threes, good free throw percentage, not absolutely horrendous field goal percentage. It's not good, but it's not absolutely horrendous. So yes, he is getting another year older, and some of his stuff may start to drop off. He's 32 years of age at the moment, so he might start to drop off. But I still think that you can get some value out of Barea. Now, I see that Carl Villa has chimed in here. He says, I don't know if this was discussed if Dirk retires. How do you see the front court minutes distributed? Who gets the upgrade? Dirk's not retiring. I can guarantee you that Dirk Nowitzki is not retiring. So I haven't thought about that, and I'm not thinking about that rotation. Dirk is not retiring. But I'm going to say, if he did, Harrison Barnes plays the 4. Nerlens Noel is at center. Dwight Powell backs up both positions. Wes Matthews plays the 3, and then Curry plays alongside another guard. That's how it is. But Dirk is not retiring. You can write that in permanent marker. Dirk is not retiring for this season unless he suffers some sort of horrific off-season injury. Dirk is not retiring. Dwight Powell. A real weird season for Dwight Powell. He had opportunities when Bogut was hurt, and he'd play, and then he'd play limited minutes, and he'd be in and out. Him and Salah Mejri would rotate, and Rick Carlisle was super frustrating with using Powell. He ended up playing 17 minutes a game in his 77 games for the season, and was the 218th ranked player this season. But from head-to-head leagues pre-All-Star, he was 152nd, and the reason behind that is his efficiency was absolutely through the roof, as was his defensive numbers. In 17 minutes a game, he had 0.8 steals. In 30 minutes, you're talking about 1.3 steals, 1.4. He had half a block as well. So almost, we're talking Nerlens, well, not quite Nerlens Noel, but steal and block categories that were high. Field goal percentage, 52 and 76% from the line. He had a true shooting of 59% for the season. And his value, which it was there in that pre-All-Star period when Bogut was out, before Noel arrived, and when Dirk was out, you were getting great efficiency from Powell and really solid defensive numbers. Now, I think that Powell can still become a decent player in the NBA, but it looks like he's going to be limited to being a bench backup big who's really going to struggle to get over 20 minutes a game. And in fact, he was the worst player on this team in terms of on-off numbers outside of the guys who played limited minutes. He was a negative 5.3. And that's something that obviously goes against him somewhat. But he did have some other solid advanced numbers, and some of the lineups with him in it were quite good. We saw him basically sort of hold steady in a lot of his per 36 numbers, but the big increase was his efficiency, taking it from 56 to 59%, which is a huge thing, and increasing his steal and block rate, which is where the majority of Dwight Powell's value came from this season. I think that he can be a top 200 player next season, and comfortably a top 200 guy when Dirk does retire, whether that's after next season or after the year after that, which is what he's currently speculating. Whether he goes for 2 more or 1 more remains to be seen. But Powell is just going to be stuck into that backup 4, backup 5 sort of a role, who provides defensive numbers with good efficiency, and that's totally fine. Salah Mejri was the 269th ranked player this season. He played in 73 games and 12 minutes a game, 3 points, 4 boards, almost a block at 64% from the field for a true shooting of 65. Shot just 59% from the line as well. And Mejri was that guy again. If he got minutes, you were going to get numbers. You get lots of block shots, you get high efficiency scoring, and you'd get rebounds. But where does he sit now with Noel, Powell, Dirk playing at the 5, and then Mejri's there? Yeah, he's not young. He's only been in the league 2 years, but he is definitely not young. He's 30 years of age. I think this is just what it is for Mejri. Now, his numbers were good. All his advanced numbers were super. He was a 4.5 positive in the on-off numbers. He was able to put up top 200 numbers before Noel arrived on this team. And yeah, it all looks great. But as we talk about, the numbers can look good, but you've got to have that opportunity to actually be able to execute those numbers. And I just don't think that Mejri is really going to have that moving forward. And he's just going to be a deeper league sort of guy who's going to slide behind Noel and Powell and be that third stringer who probably doesn't play as many minutes next season as what he did this last season. Who is next up? Dorian Finney-Smith, the undrafted rookie who was a really huge surprise for this team. 81 games played, 20 minutes a game, and did absolutely nothing with them in terms of fantasy output. Now, he was good for what this team needed, no doubt about that. Actually was 4th highest on the team in minutes. But at PER of 7, offensive box score plus minus, -3. But what he did bring was a really solid defensive attitude, a positive 1.3 in defensive box score plus minus, which is great for a wing. Positive influence in defensive win shares as well. Pretty strong defensive rating, but just horrible on the offensive end. And majority of stuff that happens from us from a fantasy point of view is offensive. He and his game was pretty offensive. He was 293rd pre-All-Star. 356th post All-Star, and the team was 1 point per 100 possessions better off with him on the court. He averaged just 4.3 points and 2.8 rebounds, but where his value, if any of it was, it came from the fact that he hit 0.7 threes and had 0.6 steals. 37% shooting, 75% from the line. I have no doubt that he'll be retained from this team. They'll guarantee that contract, and he'll be part of the rotation, but he won't be a fantasy option really at any point moving forward. He is not young. He's 23 years of age, and he is going to be a defensive wing player that plays those 20 minutes a game behind Harrison Barnes, behind Wes Matthews, and it's not going to really have any impact on fantasy leagues whatsoever because he just does not use the ball, does not touch the ball, does not provide defensive stats despite being a good defender. And he's going to be one of those guys that's just maybe he has a top 200 season at some point in his career. I wouldn't bank on it. I think his best is going to be a top 250 type of scenario. DeAndre Liggins was a player that did come across for this team late. He played one game at 25 minutes. I see him very much like Finney Smith in terms of being a defensive specialist, and I don't think there's much to see with him. He started some games for Cleveland during the season, didn't do them that well, and eventually was moved to the bench, and he doesn't provide really much apart from his ability to get steals, and he averaged over the course of the season 0.8 steals in 12.5 minutes. He is not a young player either. He did spend some time for Oklahoma City, then was out of the NBA. He's 28 years of age. I see zero upside for DeAndre Liggins moving forward, and I wouldn't have any sort of interest in acquiring him. The last three players in this team that they barely played. Jared Utoff played only 9 games and 13 minutes a game, but I thought he looked pretty okay. 4.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, below average efficiency, just 49% true shooting, and defensively he does struggle quite a bit, but he showed enough to say maybe they bring him back for camp and see how it goes. But his overall fantasy upside, I believe it's pretty limited. I don't think there's a huge amount to love with Utoff. In fact, he was the team in his 9 games was 27.5 points per 100 possessions better with him on the bench. That is a staggeringly large amount. I just don't see much for Jared Utoff. Now I just realised that I have skipped Devin Harris, so let's go back to talk about him. 65 games for Devin, 17 minutes, 6.5 points, a 3 a game, 2 assists, 0.7 steals, 40% from the field, 33% from 3, and a really good 83% from the line. Injuries are always going to be the problem with Devin Harris. He consistently struggles with them. He did lead the team in on-off, though, with a positive 7.5, but with Barea, with Ferrell, with Curry, with potentially new guys coming in, I just don't see. It was Matthews, of course. Harris is basically a shooting guard at this point and a backup shooting guard. And even when he gets an opportunity, I'm not overly excited because he can't play the minutes. He just cannot stand more than, say, 22 minutes a night. And that's to do with injuries which have ravaged his career. I don't see much changing for him. I think they bring him back at that $4 million non-guaranteed deal. I think they bring him back at that, but not much is going to change, I don't feel, from Devin Harris as we move forward in terms of his fantasy value or impact on this team. In fact, it's probably, if anything, only going to shrink. The last two guys, Nicholas Brasino. I really liked what we saw from Brasino in the second half of the season when they were giving him some good minutes. I thought he looked decent in those post-All-Star games. He played 15 minutes a game, 5 points, 3 rebounds, an assist, a 3, half a steal. Didn't shoot the ball well, but he showed an ability as a wing player to handle the ball. And if I'm in a 30-team league, I think that Brasino could find himself in a bigger role next season. Now, he was horrendous in terms of on-off, a negative 9.7. But he's got a chance to crack the top 250 next season in a 30-team league. That can have some value depending on what they do with some of their other guys. We already know that they lost Darren Williams during the season, and maybe they don't bring back Devin Harris, and Brasino fits into that role. But he is a longer-term investment that might have a top 200 season in him, maybe a top 250. But his ability to be a point forward with some okay defense, nothing spectacular, but okay defense and pretty good shooting at times, especially with him from three. I think he's got that ability to become a good shooter. He is one of their young players, and he's not old. He's not young. He's 23 years of age, like Dorian Finney-Smith. I think he's got probably higher upside than Finney-Smith if they were to play equal minutes. I just think that DFS probably plays more minutes for this team moving forward. But Brasino is a guy that can be a contributor, and I wouldn't completely rule him out of 30-team consideration. AJ Hammonds struggled during the season, showed a couple of flashes, but when you got a true shooting at 47 as a big man, it's not ideal. 22 games, 7.5 minutes, 2 points, 2 boards, 0.6 blocks. With Mejri getting up in age at age of 30, Hammonds could move into that role in the next couple of seasons, but with Noel in town, it's hard to see Hammonds really developing into anything super good for this team. But I liked what we saw from him post All-Star a lot more. Averaged 5 and 3.5, 1.5 block shots. And if he ever found himself in a 20-minute role, you consider the impact he could have, maybe like a Bismack Biyombo, maybe like a Jan Mihinmi being able to execute 1.7, 2 blocks a game, 6 rebounds, 6 points, that sort of a thing. He obviously has to work on a few things off court and some of his efficiency numbers. But he could be a player that has a little bit of value as a deeper Dynasty League guy. So, guys like Brasino and Hammonds are guys that I would value in deeper Dynasty over a player like Utoff or Finney-Smith or Devin Harris for that matter. I think those two have the ability to develop into rotational players. And while they do that, become decent fantasy guys. Now, Hammonds is older than Finney-Smith and Brasino, so he is 24 at the moment. So there is limited upside there, I guess, but the numbers that he put up definitely weren't totally discouraging, and it should give you a little bit of something, I guess, to hope for the coming seasons. But it's a long shot investment for maybe 2 years down the track for Brasino and Hammonds both. There's not a lot to talk about with this team with fantasy. It's just a weird team. Maybe that changes in this off season. That's covered all the players. Let's have a look at the questions that you guys asked, and people didn't have too many questions about this team either. Dean Vasic, with 5 point guard prospects in the top 10 draft this year, do the Mavericks hope that Smith or Ntilikina fall to them, or do they make a play for a point guard in free agency and try and give Dirk one more run at the playoffs next season? We have seen Cuban always look to restack the team, so I don't think that any of those 5 point guards will fall to pick 9, and they will be forced to go with a point guard in free agency or roll it back with Seth Curry. But I think they'll make the offers to Drew, to Hill, to Teague, and I also don't think they'll be successful with any of those offers. So they'll just run it back with Seth and try and get their point guard of the future in some other way. But they are definitely looking for a point guard. Eric Wolfmeyer says, should the Mavericks bring in a head coach such as Kevin McHale? Absolutely not. Rick Carlisle is one of the best head coaches in the entire NBA. He's probably a top 5 head coach in the NBA. I have no idea why they would be looking for a new head coach. Carlisle is awesome and remains awesome, and he's going to be there for a very long time. Jackie Dalich, is Yogi Ferrell going to remain the team's best player next season? I have a couple of issues with this question. Remain? He wasn't the team's best player this year, not even close to it. And no, he won't become the team's best player next year. From a fantasy point of view, it'll clearly be Noel, in my opinion, and then it's Barnes, then it's Curry, then it's Dirk, and Ferrell falls way down that track, which I talked about a little bit earlier. And not trying to pick on you at all here, Jackie, but that's part of that overvaluation that Ferrell got to me as a player last season. And that's one of those things that if he has a couple of good games at the start of the season, you might be able to trade him for some value, pick him up off the wire and get something back, because I just don't value him as highly as what some other people do. And I definitely don't see him being the team's next player or best player next season. All right, that does it for today's Dallas Mavericks season in review. Go and check out the other 8 podcasts. We've had Suns, Sixers, Lakers, Kings, all those teams that are picking ahead of the Mavericks in the draft. We've done all those podcasts. Tomorrow we're going to have 2 shows. We're going to have the New Orleans Pelicans and the Charlotte Hornets. There are a couple of days this week where we're having 2 shows in order for me to make sure that all this is done before we head to the NBA draft. And I've got 2 NBA draft shows scheduled, one for next week and one for the week after as well, where we're going to be talking about the incoming rookies with some people who have studied this for a very, very long time and looked at that in depth. So I look forward to those podcasts, and I hope you do as well. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or TuneIn, and leave a review if you like the show. 5 stars is always best, and it does help the show out quite a bit. All right, we are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Dirk Nowitzki.